Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and this is another fans only episode where I answer all fan questions that have been emailed to me over at purpleinsider.com. Just go to the contact us, shoot me an email, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Matthew Coller. Fire me a DM with your question and we'll get it into the show. Lots to talk about leading up to the NFL draft. So get your questions in and I will make sure that I answer them here on the show. So let's not waste any time. Kick it right off with an email that came from John, who said, I haven't heard any other rumors that we are doing private workouts with May or any quarterback besides McCarthy. Would it be safe to assume that we like McCarthy more, or is it more due diligence? So there was a report that they were meeting with Michael Penix, but the thing about all draft related reports and items is that the teams don't announce what they're doing all the time. In fact, almost never do they announce what they're doing. So the Vikings are very, very likely to meet with every one of these quarterbacks that could potentially be drafted in the first round, and maybe some quarterbacks even that we don't expect, like Spencer Rattler. We could see that happening potentially, but they don't have to tell anybody that they're doing it, when, where, how, what type of workout they're putting the guy through. So it's only if a reporter finds out, which often happens through the agent telling someone, or a team, I guess, letting an insider know that they're doing their due diligence. But if the Vikings aren't doing that, then you're not finding out. But this is a process that Kevin O'Connell talked about at the owners' meetings that is extremely, extremely important to him. And this is why when the Vikings don't show up at somebody's pro day, then we see, oh, well, they weren't at this guy's pro day. But O'Connell said, don't look into that at all, because the pro days just are not that important to Kevin O'Connell in comparison to these private workouts that I almost guarantee you every one of these quarterbacks, probably outside of Caleb Williams, they will put that guy through a workout. They'll get in a whiteboard with him. They'll look at film. Kevin O'Connell will sit down with these guys. And he talked about that process, what he's looking for, what it means to him to be able to sit in a room and simulate what it's going to be like to work with these quarterbacks as they make the decision of, do you want to try to trade it all for Drake May? Are you comfortable with trading 2 firsts for JJ McCarthy? Or would you rather stick and pick at 11 because you really fell in love with Bo Nix or Michael Penix? All those things are potentially on the table, but Kevin O'Connell can't decide which his favorite option is without spending that sit down time with these quarterbacks, and to take things that they look at on film and at the whiteboard, and then take them out into a field and do a little bit of a workout. And you saw from the Gruden camp, which I think was a very good simulation of what this is really like. And if you haven't seen those, go back and watch them on YouTube, where John Gruden would take the guy out onto the field and give him a play call. And then they'd have to go into a huddle with a couple receivers, give the play call, go through what they were supposed to do with the read, and just for him to get a sense of what they were like to work with and how quickly they could put it in their mind and then take it out to the field. I mean, that is a huge part of playing quarterback in the NFL, is just to be able to see something on paper and then see it on the field and be able to translate it. So they're going to do that with everyone that they could potentially draft, not just McCarthy. And look, we don't really know for sure if McCarthy is someone that they would love. It's just everybody putting the dots together of, hey, the Vikings need a quarterback. 100% they need a quarterback. So look at the quarterbacks in this draft class. Can you actually get your hands on Drake May? It's not clear that they're going to be able to. And McCarthy has a lot of momentum coming out of winning a national championship, the way that he handled the NFL Combine. All those things have played into his hype and his rise throughout this time. So we're really looking at it as there's a top 4, and then there's a second tier of 2 other quarterbacks. That may not turn out to be right on draft night, but if it is right, then the Vikings have to land one of those 4. So you're going to look at McCarthy closely and say, is he worth trying to get ourselves into that top 4? Or would it be better to get the second tier prospect only not have to spend all the draft capital. These are decisions that can only be made if Kevin O'Connell sits down with these quarterbacks. So no, I don't think that it is an indicator, just what's been reported of who they might like. I think that they'll sit down with everybody. And I also believe that Kevin O'Connell will not tell anybody. I'm not even sure that by the end of this, Kevin O'Connell's family is going to know who he wants to be his quarterback, because that's what teams do. I remember that with Mac Jones, that everyone in the world assumed that the 49ers were in on Mac Jones. And there was a story after that draft that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan were the only people in the entire organization who knew that they were targeting Trey Lance at the top of that draft. It did not turn out to be a great decision for the 49ers, but they were the only ones who knew, and that's why you didn't see any reports about it. So that's draft season for you, but I promise you the Vikings are going to do their diligence with every one of these quarterbacks before they make their decision, which is probably the reason why we have not gotten this trade up yet, if it's going to happen. And it still could take all the way until draft night. We'll find out. But yeah, I don't think that there's any way, looking at mock drafts or looking at reports or looking at who they visited with, to figure out what the Vikings plan actually is inside their heads. We can only put it together using our logic. And with that said, if it is McCarthy, you could see why that would be a very good fit with Kevin O'Connell, though. Next question from Andrew. Does the timing of the JJ contract have anything to do with the Vikings, when the Vikings will pull the trigger on a trade up in the draft? No, I don't believe so at all. I don't think that the draft or the quarterback situation is related to Justin Jefferson really at all. I mean, with Justin Jefferson, if we think about players as independent contractors who are trying to negotiate the best thing for them, then we can kind of reduce some of the noise around a contract negotiation like Justin Jefferson and focus on what it really comes down to. What it really comes down to with Justin Jefferson is the CBA and the fact that they have 2 franchise tags in their pocket that they can use. That's really important here to the Minnesota Vikings and their negotiating power. The fact that we all know he's going to be the highest paid receiver, that he's going to be a major reason why the next guy can succeed at quarterback. That's also a part of this too, that Justin Jefferson had a good relationship with Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins is certainly not the only person under the sun who can heave a pigskin in the general direction of Justin Jefferson, and I'm sure he realizes that. But it really comes down to the money and the years and how they're going to put together and structure this contract that would be holding it up from last year. And there's things like new money. How much money would you get over if we franchise tagged you, which usually is kind of a starting point to the negotiation? How much is fully guaranteed, which is a huge part? How many years you're looking at? Are you looking at a 3, 4, or 5-year contract? Does Jefferson want the shorter deal like DK Metcalf? Does he want a longer deal to give the team a little more flexibility? I mean, with his salary cap where they can reduce some of his cap numbers, which we saw someone like Patrick Mahomes do in his deal. I mean, there are so many different ways that you can set up a contract that it takes a lot of discussion between his side and the Viking side to actually get to that point. But at the end of the day, Justin Jefferson has to realize that it's so much more favorable for him to get the guaranteed money up front, get the signing bonus, get that huge chunk of cash in his pocket right now, rather than trying to play this thing out. So that this isn't any different really than any other negotiation that we've seen from top players, though, where a lot of times coming out of their rookie contract, it takes time. It takes all the way deep into August, into early September before they can agree on a deal, because there are so many details to be worked out of just even the general structure of a contract that's going to be this massive. That's really what the holdup is. Also, just in the cadence of how off seasons work, sometimes you will see in March or April or February that there is a contract extension. It does happen. But for the Vikings, traditionally, the way that it's gone is they go through the free agency, they go through the draft, and this is unless there is a deadline to get an extension done before a certain trigger date. They'll go through on a rookie contract all the way through the beginning of August or just before training camp. And that's when they'll work out the deal. So the negotiating will be happening and getting started in the summer around minicamp. But normally, I mean, we saw this with Delvin Cook, where it went right before the season. When Stephon Diggs signed his deal, it was a couple weeks into camp. Xavier Rhodes, same thing, couple weeks into camp. TJ Hawkinson last year. I mean, I could think of a ton of these off the top of my head that usually happen in training camp at some point. So that's my expectation with Justin Jefferson. I don't think it's connected at all to this thing that's happening with the quarterback situation. I guess if the Vikings somehow came away with no rookie quarterback at all, maybe there would be some more trepidation on Justin Jefferson's part, but I really don't think that it's connected as far as with the trade up. I think once the Vikings acquired that 23rd pick, we saw their plan. They revealed their plan to us that they want to trade up. They want to try to get to the very top of the draft. They didn't really hide that at the owners' meetings. This is what they want, and they're going to try to focus on the quarterback decision now and then turn their focus as an organization to Jefferson as we get throughout the summer. So it is going to take us all just kind of being patient and working our way through. And hey, look, maybe it'll be funny, some of the ailments that Justin Jefferson might come down with, like it was last year with Hawkinson. But remember, TJ Hawkinson, a lot of Vikings fans were getting worked up over Hawkinson. He's not worth it, whatever. Then they worked out the deal. We saw the structure of the deal. He played great. Everybody moved on. I would expect the same thing happens with Justin Jefferson. And if I'm wrong, then we'll talk about it when we get there. But just going off of history, that's how it's almost always gone. This question comes from T.A. Shelvis. Says, do you know if a 4-point field goal has ever been proposed in the past? Maybe a plus 65 yarder. I don't believe that it's ever actually been proposed by a competition committee, that it's ever been discussed. But just for you, TA, I decided to Google this and look up if it's ever been a discussion anywhere. And it turns out that, and I didn't remember this because maybe I never saw one, that NFL Europe had a 4-point field goal. And I discovered this from an article in the Washington Post by a writer named Bob Levy from 2003. And you guys are really going to enjoy this article because I went through this and thought, yeah, football was in a bit of a different spot 20 years ago with the way we were talking about it. So Bob Levy, Washington Post, 2003, decided to propose in one of the nation's largest newspapers a 4-point field goal. This is the only place I can ever find anyone saying that the NFL should do this. But he wrote, the awful truth, pro football has become a stone cold bore. Imagine that. Imagine pro football being a stone cold bore. NFL athletes do next to nothing to vault you out of your chair, says Bob Levy. And later on in the article, he comes up with a solution. He says, here comes the cure-all for the no fun league. A 4-point field goal. NFL Europe already offers it and has since the league opened for business in 1991. If a place kick travels more than 50 yards over there, a team gets one more point than if a place kick doesn't. That means 4-point field goal is possible anytime the ball is on the opponent's 34 or 35. Wow. I mean, with kickers now, they'd be just banging home every time a team got to the 35-yard line, 50-yard field goals. And so it has been proposed by this writer who was very bored with the NFL way back in 2003, but that's the only time that I've ever heard of it. You're right that we would have to do 65 plus at this point. I don't need that. I have never thought that I needed that at any point. It's the same with the 4-point shot in basketball. Don't need that. I think that the NFL, now that they've fixed the kickoffs, is pretty close to perfect if they copy. And maybe some of you actually saw this. The UFL, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And by the way, the kickoff came from the XFL. So these leagues are always being used as test cases. But the genius of the UFL, and this was used in the XFL as well, they give us on TV the referees talking with the reviewers, and they do instant reviews in a snap. So they will review something. They'll go up to Dean Blandino, who is in the review center. He's got all these TV screens. He takes a look at it. He tells them back on the field, we play on. It's great. The reason to watch the UFL is, for one, a center caught a 50-yard touchdown. I mean, that's a reason to watch. There's a lot of great stories. It's good football. I enjoy it. But check this out. You have to check out this replay system that they have that the NFL will absolutely have to implement at some point very soon. So that's the change I want. I don't need the 4-point field goal, but that to me is just going too far. It would be interesting only for the schematic of, do you actually try a 4-point field goal if you are in that range? If you got the ball at the 48-yard line, do you run out your kicker for a 67-yarder to see if you can get 4 points? That to me is going a little too far indoor football-ish, but I don't think we'll ever see it. It would be interesting for maybe like a preseason game to try it, but I don't know, man. I can't get on board with the 4-point field goal. RW asks, how about calling the Giants and offering 11 and 23 to get 6? Takes your greatest threat off the table. And if they say no, we can assume that they want a quarterback. Hey, you're playing 3D chess, RW. I really appreciate that. That's an interesting plan. The only issue is, if you get to 6, then Denver can maybe get to 4 if they decide to give everything that they have to the Arizona Cardinals, if the Cardinals are actually going to move. Now, one thing is that the Cardinals and Chargers might not be interested in moving, because when you look at the caliber of wide receiver that's there, and remember, DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen both used to play for Arizona and the Chargers, and those guys no longer do. So they don't have the superstar wide receivers. This draft has 2 guys that are considered next level franchise caliber type of receiver prospects. They may want to stick and pick. We've kind of gone on the assumption that Arizona would be more willing to move out of that spot, or the Chargers more willing to move out of that spot, because they're not looking at quarterbacks. But if they're moving all the way down to 11 or 12 where the Broncos are, or 13 where the Raiders are, you're not getting one of those top players. And so if you think that they're going to stick and pick, then the Giants do become a potential team to look at if they're not going to draft a quarterback. And, the Giants just need players. And so this is a scenario that we have not really talked about or considered at all, because of the fact that the Giants have been connected to the quarterback class as well, and that they've been viewed as a pretty big threat. But when I was looking at their roster yesterday, I was doing a piece on ranking the supporting casts and looking at their roster, and buddy, it's ugly. It is ugly. I mean, they got a couple wide receivers who you would love to have as wide receiver 3, and that's about as good as it gets. Darren Waller always plays half the season. Their offensive line has pretty much one guy to work with. The defense needs a lot of work. They just lost one of their top players in free agency. This is a team that needs 2 first-round draft picks. So I haven't considered that, but maybe we shouldn't count out the Giants as a potential option if the Vikings believe that the other 2 teams are going to stay at their spots and pick at 4 and 5. Because if you make that deal to trade up to number 6, and then Denver gets to number 4, and then 4 quarterbacks go off the board, and you're going, Dallas Turner, I guess. I mean, that would be the biggest fear in that instance, is that you would get up to 6, assuming that the other 2 teams were going to stick and pick, and then you end up losing out on the quarterbacks because of that. And then I don't know what they do in that spot. Do you just pick Michael Penix there because you have to, and then you tell everybody that he was always a first round top 10 pick on your board? I honestly don't know. So that would be the biggest concern there. But if you're doing it for intel purposes to try to find out if they want the quarterback at number 6, that's pretty clever. I got to say, that's some pretty clever. Hey, look, Kevin O'Connell's dad was in the FBI. You're playing some FBI games there with the New York Giants. But to me, you got to go a little higher if you can. And that's why it may be based on this whole decision. It may be based on how much intel they have and what they believe that other teams are going to do, whether they can trade up to 3, 4, or 5, or even potentially 6. And that's why there's so many scenarios on the table when it comes to this. But much respect for your three-dimensional chess there. All right. Sam H says, what would the Vikings do? Oh, so this is actually kind of related to what we were just talking about. What would the Vikings do if they traded up to 5 and then someone jumped in front of them at 4 to take the quarterback they wanted? Do they trade down in that scenario? That would be wild. So they're thinking Arizona's going to stay. They've already traded their first couple of draft picks. They get to number 5. And then suddenly on draft night, it goes quarterback, quarterback, quarterback. Arizona at the last minute says, you know what? Actually, Denver's giving us the house. They're giving us Pat Surtain at cornerback, and they're also giving us multiple 3 first-round draft picks. They went all in because they want J.J. McCarthy, and now the Vikings are stuck holding the bag at number 5. And if we look after that, though, you got the Giants who could draft a quarterback. Then you've still got another couple of teams that are around that could take a QB, including the Raiders. So if you were going to trade back out of that position, who's going to move up is a question. Maybe somebody wants one of the wide receivers and you can slide back. So that would be crazy. You're going up thinking you're getting the quarterback. Then you're going, like that GIF where the baby kind of runs into the room and then gets scared and turns around. Like that would be the Vikings version in the draft, running into the room. And now we're running back to the whatever number pick. Maybe you're moving back to like what, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 with the Jets might be an interesting one to trade back with if they want a wide receiver to give Aaron Rodgers right away. That would be a chaotic scenario. But I don't think it's the worst thing of all time if they still end up with multiple players, because that's, as we're laying out the scenarios here, the ones that are acceptable are going all the way up for Drake May, trading enough to get JJ McCarthy, but not so much that you ruin your life. And then also, if you get 2 players in the first round, if you get a quarterback, but then also end up with another defensive player, a cornerback, a defensive tackle, and so forth. I mean, we haven't really talked as much about the cornerback class, but I've looked at, Terry and Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry. Quinyon Mitchell is a guy that maybe is going a little too high for the Vikings to get. But if they landed 2 players, that's still a favorable situation, even if it looks really goofy as you're proposing. I doubt that it will. I think by the time you get there, you're going to have a good sense of what everybody else is doing, what the offer is that they're going to have to top. And look, if Arizona's not taking the Vikings offer with 2 first rounders this year, then how is Denver getting ahead of that? Like, that's why you trade for number 23, is that you're really saying this is going to be us or nobody with the best offer to trade up. But that is a chaos scenario for sure. All right, last question. This from KC Vikings Fan here. Could you do an analysis specifically on quarterbacks that rise up the draft board in the weeks before the draft and how many come close to living up to the hype? My instinct is that they don't. So I asked an analytics expert on this, Tej Seth, who works for Sumer Sports. He's come on the show a number of times, and he had done some work on this, unsurprisingly. And yeah, your instinct is largely correct on the broader spectrum. On the all draft picks ever from the last whatever number of years that have gone to the combine, come out of the combine with way better draft stock than they went in, like JJ McCarthy, because I know what you're getting at here with JJ McCarthy and his sudden rise up the board, because even going into the NFL combine, using the site Grinding the Mocks or Mock Draft Database, both do kind of the same thing. They will show where consensus boards had these players, and you can see it's very clear, shoots right up to the top. So I started looking through, I just went quarterback by quarterback to try to find similar rises to the top with this position specifically, because one of the things that makes it noisy on the broader spectrum is wide receivers who show up and run an amazing 40 and then suddenly get overdrafted. And that goes for defensive ends that have a great combine, linebackers that get overrated because of their ceiling and so forth. And quarterbacks are just kind of a different animal when it comes to the evaluation, because so much less of it is just pure athleticism and more is all the other stuff. The tape is so important, the accuracy, the throwing technique. And now we have quarterbacks who are doing even less. So a guy going to the combine and doing everything, JJ McCarthy was getting credit for this from draft analysts and even Rick Spielman on his podcast for just doing it, for even just showing up. So that's going to change the evaluation in the future. But what I found was very little connection with recent quarterbacks, sudden rises or falls, and the success rate. So someone like Kenny Pickett, for example, was a borderline second round draft pick. And before the draft, he was being mocked as high as in the top 6 or 7. And, he ends up being taken number 20, but he did have a sudden rise from being kind of a borderline first round to second round pick to being considered a first round pick. He didn't work out, but there are a few other guys that had a similar rise. One was Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was a potential first round prospect in the offseason before his final year at LSU, and then became a consensus obvious number 1 pick. He's turned out to be a tremendous quarterback. Josh Allen was another one that was maybe a mid first round pick throughout Wyoming's season, especially since he didn't play that well. He ends up going at the top and had a sudden rise in the mock drafts before. Turns out to be great, but there's plenty of examples of guys who, even some who are expected to be drafted higher, like Justin Fields and Josh Rosen, that dropped and they ended up being busts. I actually think that a drop from the expected is probably more of an indicator than a rise. So if someone, or put it this way, if the mocks have somebody in the top 3, top 5, and they're actually picked 20th or in the second round, like Will Levis, that's probably more of an indicator of a bust than it is if someone reaches on a quarterback, because reaching on a quarterback just isn't a bad idea. It certainly happened with Daniel Jones where the Giants reached, but there have been other examples of that where the mock drafts had somebody as not being quite as high. A team, quote, reached for the positional value and the guy works out. Like, it happens all the time. I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason to it when it comes to this position specifically. Now, if you told me that there was a wide receiver that, maybe this is Worthy from Texas, a wide receiver who was not really considered a first rounder that suddenly was after he ran an insane 40, well, that's a different story for me than it is for quarterback. So yes, there is something to what you're saying. I think your instinct is generally overall correct, but with quarterbacks, I wouldn't be terrified of JJ McCarthy just because he ends up having that sudden rise. So thanks everybody for all the great questions here on another Fans Only episode. Make sure you go to purpleinsider.com, contact us. That's where you can send your notes to me, or on Twitter at Matthew Coller. Lots to discuss leading up to the NFL draft. We will talk to you all again very soon. Football.